Okay, welcome back. Ready for another lesson?
Mm-hmm.
Good. Let's begin by going over those 9 steps again. What are the 9 steps of exegesis for narrative?
Pray.
Okay,
Read 5 chapters before and after when the story takes place.
okay,
Figure out where the story starts and stops.
okay. The boundaries.
Yeah. And then figure out who the main characters are.
Okay,
And then figure out the arrangement, how the story's arranged.
good.
I don't remember the next step.
Okay, after arrangement is focusing questions. Go ahead.
And then figure out the exegetical central idea.
Okay,
And then go from the exegetical central idea to the theological central idea
okay,
to the lesson central idea.
okay,
And then connect from the Israelites' time to our time.
okay. Good, good. Now we've talked about what you're looking for when you read before and after. You are to look for how do the surrounding chapters relate to your story? How do they connect to your story? What's the social and religious setting of your story? Okay. Geographical setting of your story. And why do you think the author decided to tell this story? And then we also talked about identifying the boundaries. What are some of the things that we look at when identifying the boundaries? It's not just where it starts and stops. That's one of them. What else are we looking for?
The rising action.
Okay, the different stages of what's called the plot of the story, right? Okay, the major sections. So you have background, and then crisis, okay, which is the problem of the story.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have the resolution, how that problem gets resolved, and then the conclusion, right? Okay. And then the 4th step is the main characters, right? What are we looking for with the main characters?
The protagonist.
Protagonist, who is the protagonist?
The hero of the story.
Okay, good.
The antagonist.
Okay, what's the antagonist?
The bad guy or the problem
Or
situation.
the problem situation, good.
The foil.
Okay, and what's the foil?
The person that does the opposite of the protagonist. So emphasizing either the good or the bad of what the protagonist does.
Okay, so they're not the antagonist, because you might say the antagonist is the opposite, but not in the same way. Okay, the foil is a minor character that does something completely opposite of the main character, either showing that what the main character did was really, really good or really, really bad. Okay? Then you have your minor characters, and you're looking for descriptions of characters and names, relationships, okay? Things like that. And also, does any main character have a speech? Is there anything that they say? Those speeches show something about their character, and they have other significance as well. Okay, for homework, you were supposed to look at chapter 7, verses 3 through 17, and work through steps 1 through 7, all the way up to ECI. So, tell me, what did you find out? Starting with step 2, reading before and after.
Well, in chapter 4, when the Israelites weren't obeying God, the Philistines beat them. But then here in chapter 7, when they were obeying God, they were able to defeat the Philistines.
Okay, good. That's a key difference there. Good. What else?
Well, I found it interesting. This isn't really exactly within the story, but in chapter 8, it says, "When Samuel became old, he made his sons judges over Israel. The name of his firstborn son was Joel, and the name of his second Abijah. They were judges in Beersheba. Yet his sons did not walk in his ways, but turned aside after gain. They took bribes and perverted justice."
Mm-hmm.
That was interesting because that seems a lot like Hophni and Phinehas,
Mm-hmm. It does.
sons of Eli.
Yeah. And that is important because it connects all these chapters to, it's part of connecting all the chapters together. Yeah. Even though it's not specifically for this story. But good. What else?
I'm not sure where the story took place. It could have been in a field, could have been in a town.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
Okay.
But it's in Mizpah.
Okay. Mizpah. Mm-hmm.
And I think the author decided to tell the story to show how Samuel was leading Israel.
Okay. To show that he was judging Israel and to show that during his judgeship, Israel turned back to the Lord, right? Okay, good. From about verse 13 to the end of the chapter, 13 through 17, is kind of a summary of Samuel's ministry, right?
Yeah.
Okay, it says the Philistines did not enter the territory of Israel again, and the hand of the Lord was against the Philistines all the day of Samuel. Then talks about how all the cities taken from the Philistines were restored to taken by the Philistines were restored to Israel. They had peace with the Amorites. Samuel judged Israel. He went on a circuit. And it's just kind of a brief summary of Samuel's ministry. Why do you think that's there?
I'm not sure.
What happens in chapter 8?
The Israelites ask for a king.
Okay. Who was leading Israel at this time?
Samuel.
Samuel, as judge under God, right? And now they are rejecting Samuel's leadership, and more specifically God's leadership, in place of a king, right? Okay. Especially in chapter 8, verse 20, or verse 19, it says, "The people refused to obey the voice of Samuel, and they said, 'No, but there shall be a king over us, that we also may be like all the nations, and that our king may judge us.'" That's what Samuel was doing. "And go out before us and fight our battles." How's that connected to today's story?
God went before Israel.
And fought their battle for them against the Philistines, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So you see God fighting for them against the Philistines, and during the time that Samuel was judge, they took back the territory of Israel back from the Philistines. And they had peace with the Philistines and the Amorites. And there was no king. But they rejected that, and they wanted an actual king. So that becomes significant in chapter 8. And then onwards you start seeing this. The book of Samuel then focuses more on Saul from chapter 9 onwards. So the reason for the summary statement there in chapter 7 is because he's summing up Samuel's ministry. Now, have we seen a whole lot of Samuel's ministry?
Not much.
Not much. Not much at all. In fact, Samuel's ministry begins in chapter 3. Well, when he's a little boy, but then in chapter 3, he's a boy, and God calls him to be his prophet, right? And then chapter 4, 5, 6, we don't really hear anything about Samuel. And then chapter 7 is the summary of his ministry. But what do we learn about Samuel's ministry?
He followed God and did what he wants him to do.
Okay. Okay, and we're going to see more about that. How else does chapter 7 connect?
I don't know.
Okay. Okay. Notice that when they defeated the Philistines, in verse 12 it says, Then Samuel took a stone and set it up between Mizpah and Shen, and called its name Ebenezer, which means stone of help. For he said, Till now the Lord has helped us. Right? Have you seen that name Ebenezer before?
I think so, somewhere.
Somewhere. Go back to chapter 4. Okay. In chapter 4 it says, The word of Samuel came to all Israel. Now Israel went out to battle against the Philistines. They camped at Ebenezer. And the Philistines encamped at Aphek. Now, we don't know for sure if this is the same Ebenezer, and that it was only called Ebenezer later on when Samuel placed the stone there, or if it's a different place and Samuel was recalling the people to remember Ebenezer, where they had been defeated before because they were not following God, and now when they had turned back to God, this far have they been helped. Ebenezer, here's the stone of help. Okay? But it is important, that connection between those stories. Okay? Okay, good. Let's go to the boundaries of the story. Where does it start and stop?
Well, it starts in verse 3.
Okay.
I think it stops at verse 17.
Okay. That looks good. Okay, so where are the major sections?
Well, there isn't really any background.
Okay.
The crisis is it starts in verse 7. Now when the Philistines heard that the people of Israel had gathered at Mizpah, the lords of the Philistines went up against Israel. And when the people of Israel heard of it, they were afraid of the Philistines.
Okay, so that's definitely a crisis.
Yeah.
Okay. Now what we can say is that what comes before that is background. Okay, sometimes the easiest way to identify the background is just by noticing where the crisis starts. Okay, now you don't have to say precisely between this verse and this verse is where the crisis starts. It can be kind of fluid. What I would say is that verses 3 through 4 is background. Because you're not really seeing any action taking place. No immediate action. It's kind of just telling what happened. Samuel said, if you return to the Lord, put away the foreign idols. And so Israel put away the foreign idols. Then you have action beginning in verse 5. Samuel says, Gather all Israel at Mount Mizpah, and I will pray to the Lord for you. So they gathered at Mizpah and drew water and poured it out. So you see action taking place. Okay? So I would say that probably the crisis section begins in verse 5. But you don't really see the problem until verse 7, right? When the Philistines gather together. Okay? Okay, now you really don't have rising tension here because they came to the right solution right away.
Yeah.
Okay? And so then you have the climax, which is
Verse 9. So Samuel took a nursing lamb and offered it as a whole burnt offering to the Lord. And Samuel cried out to the Lord for Israel, and the Lord answered him.
The Lord answered him, but what happens?
10. As Samuel was offering up the burnt offering, the Philistines drew near to attack Israel. But the Lord thundered with a mighty sound that day against the Philistines and threw them into confusion, and they were defeated before Israel.
That would be the climax, yes.
Okay.
Okay? Yeah. And then the resolution?
Probably verses 11 through 13. 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 11 thro 13.
Okay. Or the first part of 13.
Yeah.
And it says,
And the men of Israel went out from Mizpah and pursued the Philistines and struck them as far as below Bethkar. Then Samuel took a stone and set it up between Mizpah and Shen, and called its name Ebenezer, for he said, "Till now the Lord has helped us." So the Philistines were subdued and did not again enter the territory of Israel.
okay, good. And then the conclusion.
The second part of verse 13 through 17.
Actually, I would say all of verse 13. I'd probably say the resolution ends at the end of verse 12. There, and that final statement. So the Philistines were subdued and did not enter again the territory of Israel. That's almost a concluding statement. And so you can say from 13 on down through 17 is the conclusion. Okay? Good. Main characters. This is going to be harder in this chapter. Who's the protagonist?
Samuel,
Why do you say Samuel?
because he's the one leading Israel and asking God to help them.
Okay, and he's doing this, and Samuel's doing this, and Samuel's doing this, right? Okay, all through the story. Good. Antagonist.
The Philistines.
Okay, the Philistines. Yes, that's the problem situation. The Philistines are the antagonist. Foil.
I don't think there is a foil.
Good. There's no foil in this story. Minor characters.
The Israelites.
They're a major character. They're not really minor. It's about the Israelites, but there's no individual minor characters. It's just kind of Israel there. Okay? Are there any descriptions of characters? No descriptions of characters. And you'll find that is usually the case. Names and relationships.
Well, Ebenezer has a special meaning.
Good. Which means what?
Stone of help.
Okay, stone of help, and I already talked about the connection between Ebenezer here and in chapter 4, right? Okay. What else? We're talking specifically about characters.
I don't think there's anything else. Well, Shamuel.
Which means?
God hears.
God hears. God hears. Do you think that's significant in this story?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, it is. Okay. And notice that Samuel is mentioned by name a lot. Samuel said to all Israel. Then Samuel said, verse 5. Verse 6, and Samuel judged them. And then in verse 8, the people of Israel said to Samuel, do not cease to cry to the Lord for us. Verse 9, so Samuel took a nursing lamb. It didn't say he took, it just says Samuel took. And Samuel cried out to the Lord. It doesn't say he cried out to the Lord. His name cried out to the Lord. Okay, Samuel cried out to the Lord. And as Samuel was offering up the burnt offering, okay, his name over and over, it's redundant almost. You don't need to have Samuel. If we're writing literature, a story, you usually don't say, Rebecca did this, then Rebecca did this, then Rebecca did this. You'd say, then she went, and she went, and she went. You'd usually do something like that, right? Okay? Very often that's the case in the Bible, unless you want to emphasize the person's name. And then you have in verse 12, then God heard, took a stone and set it up between Mizpah and Shen, called its name Stone of Help. Okay? And said, till now, the Lord has helped us. So, yeah, I think his name is significant in that passage there. Okay, are there anyone who's not called by name that we would think should be called by name?
Not really.
Not really. Any special relationship term used?
I don't think so.
Nope, don't think so. Okay, and then any main character have a speech?
Samuel.
Samuel. Okay. And what does that speech tell us about Samuel's character?
He tries to serve God, and he asks God for help when he's in trouble.
Okay, good. You went on then to the next step, which was look at the arrangement. Did you see anything about arrangement? We haven't really discussed arrangement a whole lot yet, but did you see anything jump out at you about the way it's arranged?
I don't think so.
Okay, it's a pretty straightforward story. So there's not a whole lot that is unusual about the arrangement, aside from the long conclusion, which we already talked about, because that sets us up for chapter 8, in which Israel rejects Samuel and God and wants a king. Then you have, what's next after arrangement?
Focusing questions.
Focusing questions. So the two that you've learned so far are vision of God and
Vision of God.
character of God and
human nature.
human nature.
So the character of God is to forgive his people when they turn back to him, and 2, to help them when they need.
Okay. Which one do you think is the primary focus of this story?
Probably to forgive them.
Okay. Why do you say that?
Because here he helped them after they had turned back to him, but then before in chapter 4 he hadn't helped them because they weren't following him.
Okay. So you were just talking about him helping them. But you said you thought the major one was that he forgives. Let's look at the arrangement again. What part of the story has the crisis? The part about God forgiving or the part about God helping?
The part about him helping them.
Okay. And let's also talk about remember we talked about how much time is spent talking about something, how many verses is spent talking about something. Okay. Where do you see the forgiveness part in this story?
I think it actually says that.
Okay. It's kind of implied that God does that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what is actually the focus?
Him helping them?
Yeah. You're right. That's because he forgave them. But the focus is not on the fact that he forgave them. The focus is on the fact that he helped them, right? That he delivered them from the Philistines. Let's come back to the speeches of Samuel here. In verse 3, he says, "If you are returning to the Lord with all your heart, then put away the foreign gods and the Ashtaroth from among you, and direct your heart to the Lord and serve him only, and he will deliver you out of the hand of the Philistines," right? So, first part is put away the foreign gods and serve him only. Serve God only. That's the first part, right? Second part is God will deliver you from the Philistines. So, verse 4, the people of Israel put away the Baals and the Ashtaroth, and they served the Lord only. So they did the first part. And all that takes place in 2 verses. Right? Then you're waiting to see, what about the second part? He will deliver you out of the hand of the Philistines. Well, that's verses 5 down through 14. Right? Okay. The people of Israel in verse 8 say, "Do not cease to cry out to the Lord our God for us, that he may save us from the hand of the Philistines." Right? Then you have in verse 9, "And Samuel cried out to the Lord for Israel, and the Lord answered him." And then you see them thrown into confusion. They strike the Philistines, and then in verse 12, Samuel took a stone and set it up between Mizpah and Shen and called its name Ebenezer, for he said, "Till now the Lord has helped us." So what's the focus here?
God helping them.
Good. Glad you got that. Okay. The vision of God in this passage is that God is the God who helps Israel over their enemies. Right? Okay. What's the human nature?
I'm not sure.
Well, here's where you need to think about the broader context. You already did a very good job in connecting this chapter with chapter
4.
Chapter 4. What happened in chapter 4?
The Israelites didn't obey God and they got defeated.
Well, they
For
took the
Philistine.
Ark of the Covenant with them into battle.
That's not necessarily obeying God.
What's the difference?
They weren't serving him and doing what he asked them to do. They just took him into battle.
Okay. They were making the Ark of the Covenant like a good luck charm. They weren't seeking God himself. They just wanted their good luck charm with them in battle. The difference between that and this chapter is that in that chapter, they wanted to come up with their own solution. They wanted God to be their good luck charm. They weren't willing to serve God and put him first. Here, the prerequisite to God helping them was that they serve the Lord only. And once they did that, then God was willing to help them and save them from the Philistines, right? So human nature is
Not to obey God.
not to obey God, not wanting to serve God only, wanting to do things our way. After focusing questions is
Exegetical central idea.
good. What'd you come up with?
When God's people turn back to him, he'll forgive them and help them.
Okay. When God's people turn back to him, he'll forgive them and help them. You could also put it this way. When Israel followed God alone, God helped them defeat their enemies. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Does that capture it? So we're not going to turn that into a theological central idea just yet, because we'll get to that part a little bit later on. Today, I want to talk more about arrangement. We want to know, are there repeated words or phrases? Different words and phrases that are repeated. Now, those words and phrases that are repeated can hold significant meaning. In verse 3, Samuel says, "Put away the foreign gods and the Ashtaroth from among you, and direct your heart to the Lord and serve him only." Verse 4, the people of Israel put away the Baals and the Ashtaroth, and they served the Lord only. Now, the significance of that repetition, the reason why that's repeated almost word for word, is to show that the people of Israel did precisely what Samuel said. Other phrases that are repeated. There's not so much repeated phrases, but there's repeated concepts here. You have, it says, the Lord will deliver you out of the hand of the Philistines in verse 3. Then you have the Philistines gathering against them, and in verse 8, the people of Israel said to Samuel, "Do not cease to cry out to the Lord our God for us, that he may save us from the hand of the Philistines." Okay, save, deliver from the hand of the Philistines, save from the hand of the Philistines. Okay. Then you have the defeat of the Israelites, and then
The
Philistines. And then Samuel in verse 12 says, "Till now the Lord has helped us," which is the same concept of he has delivered us, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's not the exact phrase that's repeated, but it is the concept that's repeated there 3 times in the passage. Okay, we also looked at where does the author take a long time to say something. Now this was helpful in finding out the vision of God, or the character of God that's in view in this passage, right? Because you had said God forgives and God helps. But what is the real focus here? Is that God helps, that he delivers, right? Because it took a long time to show how God delivered them from the Philistines. Are there unexpected things in this story? With this idea, we're thinking more about things that you would go, wow, why did the author include that detail? That's the sort of thing we're thinking about. Why did the author include that detail? For me, an example would be verse 6. It says, "So they gathered at Mizpah, and they drew water and poured it out before the Lord, and fasted on that day, and said, 'There we have sinned against the Lord.'" The whole idea, they drew water and poured it out before the Lord. What's the significance of that? Now, the author of this story made that a special point. They drew water and poured it out before the Lord. What in the world is that all about? And honestly, I don't know. I would have to look further and see if I can find some significance to pouring out the water here before the Lord. It seems to be some sort of sacrifice that they're making to the Lord, but why specifically water? We're not sure. Okay, are there expected things that are missing in this story? Things that you might expect the author to write about, but aren't there.
That God forgave the Israelites after they turned back to him.
Okay, or a statement from God saying, "I forgive you." There isn't, right?
Mm-hmm.
What do we see instead?
That God helped them.
God helped them, and that showed that he had forgiven them, right? Okay. Is there some important information withheld until later? I don't really see any in this story. This story, again, is pretty straightforward. There isn't information that they withhold until later. And an example of that would be in the story of Jacob and Esau, where Jacob is making stew, and Esau comes and he's hungry. And they're bargaining back and forth for the birthright and the stew. And finally Esau says, "Just take the birthright and give me the stew." And he swears to him. And so then Jacob serves him, and only at that point do we learn what type of stew it is. Until that point, we don't know. Right, it's lentil stew. There's no meat in it. It's not lamb curry. It's not, beef stroganoff stew or whatever. It's just lentil stew. If you're Indian, you could say it's dal. And that's all it is. There's no meat. And that's what Esau sold his birthright for. And Moses doesn't give us that little detail till the end of the story, as if to point out just how great of a terrible decision this was that Esau made. It wasn't even really super good, expensive, wonderful stew. It was just simply lentil stew. Okay? Give special attention to speeches or conversation. In stories, the things that people say are often the key to the central idea. And we see that here in the very first speech of Samuel, where he says, if you are returning to the Lord with all your heart, then put away the foreign gods and the Ashtaroth from among you, and direct your heart to the Lord, and serve him only, and he will deliver you out of the hand of the Philistines. That sets up the whole chapter. The people do that, and God responds by delivering them from the hand of the Philistines. All the way through until in verse 13. So the Philistines were subdued and did not again enter the territory of Israel. And the hand of the Lord was against the Philistines all the days of Samuel. The cities that the Philistines had taken from Israel were restored to Israel. From Ekron to Gath, and Israel delivered their territory from the hand of the Philistines. There was peace also between Israel and the Amorites. All that conclusion there shows that God truly did deliver them from the hand of the Philistines when they turned to him. When you're looking at arrangement, you're looking for repeated words and phrases. You're looking for where does the author take a long time to say something, because that's the main focus, or a major focus, where he spends a long time to say something. Unexpected things in the story, that is, things that you go, why is that detail there? Are there expected things that are missing? Important information withheld until later. And then you give special attention to speeches or conversation. Your homework, chapter 8, doing steps 1 through 7. Special attention given to steps 1 through 5. Okay?
Okay.
And have that ready for tomorrow.